and fall, back and fall, back and fall, hush, 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 back and fall, back and fall, back and fall, hush, 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 step and rock, step and rock, ignore the world outside, step and rock, step and rock, we're safe and warm inside. Dear you, the world you've been a part of for just a few short months isn't the world I had envisaged bringing you into. It's not the world I knew. We're navigating this together, you and me, swinging by the seats of our pants. From blue line to bump, you became my happy place, my small piece of quiet while the whole world exploded. We've seen it all, you and me, from our isolated bubble. And at the same time, we've seen nothing but walls, closed doors, and hospital wards.
Motherhood in a pandemic. If you'd have asked me back in October, when I fell pregnant, if I'd be giving birth in a pandemic, I'd just laughed at you. It's not something my generation's ever known or ever thought we'd have to go through. It's like running blindfolded into this, which is just motherhood, let alone a pandemic. When we went into lockdown, it meant that my other half couldn't come to anything. And that was really hard for us because I didn't have support. I didn't have what, I dreamed it was going to be like. Nothing like that. I was on my own and I cried from the second I left my house to the second I got to hospital, and was normally quite a state before I even went in.
Back and fall, back and fall, back and fall, hush, 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 back and fall, back and fall, back and fall, hush, hush, hush.
My little girl, India, was born on the 7th of June. She was an IVF baby, our second attempt after a miscarriage the first time. And before that, lots of years of stress and worry to get to that point. So obviously a really precious time for us. Being pregnant during the pandemic, yes, felt weird. It didn't feel too difficult. I guess being at the latter stages of pregnancy meant that most of the major appointments and things like that I've been able to attend with my husband. It was definitely weird coming home from work one day, watching the news that evening and never returning to the office because of the guidance around pregnant women changing quite quickly. So I left all my stuff on my desk, my dirty coffee cup, which is probably still there, and didn't go back after kind of early March until I started my maternity leave at the end of May.
Step and rock, step and rock, ignore the world outside. Step and rock, step and rock, we're safe and warm inside. Dear you, I often feel guilt for the time we were one, when I had little idea of who you'd become. I think about the fear I felt from the external world and how I'd cradle your safe bump, wondering how you'd manage outside. See, I never planned for a global pandemic. Nobody does. We plan for tiredness. We plan for swollen ankles. We plan for heartburn, contractions, and a world shortage of baby wear. We don't plan for an illness to wipe out our norms, and we certainly don't plan to have you alone. Alone is a word I've always feared. I love the sound of chaos and the busyness in my ears. Your brothers and sister kept us afloat with their silliness and their brilliantness and just sheer love. We could stay inside forever and meet each other at home and stay safe in our bubble. We had it all worked out. But as the saying goes, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
My baby was due on the 30th of May, similar time to my little boy who was born on the 9th of May. So comparable times of year, very, very different circumstances. 5 years ago in May, everything was fine. Obviously May this year we were stuck in lockdown. Being pregnant was quite nice because I was furloughed from work. So that was quite nice, getting to spend time with my little boy, enjoying family time and really enjoying my pregnancy and resting. So that was a very positive. Obviously the negative was I was very scared. I didn't get to enjoy it with my family, which I would have done a lot more with people had I been able to go out or enjoy those things. But we were obviously locked in the house.
Back and fall, back and fall, back and fall. Hush, hush, hush. Back and fall, back and fall, back and fall. Hush, hush, hush.
I just want to have a talk to you about my pregnancy and giving birth during the coronavirus. Okay, so this was my second pregnancy, and really all I wanted to do was enjoy it this time round. However, sadly, this was not the case. Throughout my pregnancy, I was petrified, if I'm honest. I was petrified just because everyone was talking about COVID, everyone was worried, it was spreading fast, people were, getting really, really poorly, and then they started to say about pregnant women basically having to shield. So, yeah, I had to finish work 3.5 months early as a consequence, just because pregnant women were advised to shield. It basically brought so many uncertainties and I was just petrified. Deciding where to give birth was the biggest decision and brought so many what ifs. And again, due to the virus, things that you wouldn't normally think of or worry about. Every scan or appointment I had to make was on my own, without any support, and worrying, if I go into hospital, will I pick up the virus? I felt my pregnancy was robbed.
Step and rock, step and rock. Ignore the world outside. Step and rock, step and rock. We're safe and warm inside. Dear you, I tried so hard to keep you safe, but fear turned to illness without me being aware. It crept up on us, me and you. It stole away our energy bit by bit. We would lie there, you and I, getting slowly weaker and weaker. You'd kick and wriggle as I lay exhausted, unable to appreciate your twists and turns as I once did. Unable to play with your siblings as once I did. Illness stole our peace and it stole our smile. Illness was sneaky, it came in disguise. I couldn't chase it off and I couldn't stay home. We left in the night, just us two. We embraced what I feared and tumbled into the hospital bed with only each other for company.
I had quite a complicated pregnancy and things weren't going particularly very well. And my worst fear was reached when I got told that my preeclampsia had got worse and that I had a kidney infection and therefore I had to be induced early. And at that point I went into full meltdown. The idea of being away from my little girl and my other half for at least 7 days was something I was not prepared to face on my own.
Back and fall, back and fall, back and fall. Hush, hush, hush. Back and fall, back
Mike dropping me off at hospital to go in for my induction. I had no idea what to expect with an induction. I'd not read about it. I certainly didn't anticipate it lasting 5 days. I didn't really anticipate it not working. But Mike dropping me off at the hospital, that was a weird moment. Just him not being able to come in, dropping you outside with your bags, leaving him knowing that the next time I saw him properly, it would be, labour, or potentially even with our baby with us. So, yeah, that was definitely a weird moment, a sad moment. I'm quite a private person. I'm quite a reserved person. Never been on a hospital ward before. So, yeah, I have to admit I wasn't really looking forward to the experience. I arrived and I was the only person in the room in the ward at that point, and for the first couple of hours I remember thinking, maybe I'll be lucky, maybe I'll be in here on my own, so I won't have to kind of go through what is a really private, intimate thing with strangers. And how wrong I was, I suppose, to think I'd be lucky to be on my own, because actually I was lucky to not be on my own, and especially lucky to end up meeting the people that I did.
Step and rock, step and rock. Ignore the world outside. Step and rock, step and rock. We're safe and warm inside. Dear you, when I hear we'd have to stay in hospital for a while, I was terrified. When they told me my blood was all funny, I was terrified. When they told me they didn't know why, I was terrified. Terrified of what may come, terrified of the unknown, terrified of the hospital, terrified of the tests and results, terrified of what may become of me and you, terrified that I may never see your siblings and dad again, terrified of the virus, terrified of being alone. The once busy wards filled with pacing husbands and excited siblings were quiet. The only occupants, the patients and their midwives, who had to now become partners and family as well as medical carers to women who had come begrudgingly to the hospital alone, who had had their pregnancy stolen away by a virus and were now robbed of their partner's hand when they needed it the most.
And from the time I entered the hospital when I went to get induced, I felt 100% safe. The amount of PPE, the protection, the measures they had in place were just unbelievable. They cared for us, and I think I remember saying when I was in hospital, I felt totally oblivious to what was going on in the outside world. I forgot about COVID, I forgot about everything that was going on, which was quite contrary to what I thought before I went in. I was scared I would catch it, the baby would be ill, I would be ill, but didn't think about it at all.
Back and fall, back and fall, back and fall. Hush, hush, hush. Back and fall, back and fall, back and fall. Hush, hush, hush.
Complications arose in the last few weeks of my pregnancy when the baby had turned transverse. This was my worst nightmare. Going for my final scan just to double check with a week to go and hearing the dreaded words, "I want to admit you." I was reassured that they would have to have a go at turning the baby and then break my waters, and that the baby would be here and I would be in and out. Even if this was the case, I knew we weren't in normal times and coronavirus was all I could think about, and I didn't want to be admitted to hospital. I cried when I had to tell my partner after coming out of a routine scan appointment, ready to go home, and having to tell him I'm not coming home with him during a pandemic was one of the most daunting times of my life, and I can say that hand on heart. I walked up to the ward with a lovely midwife who was all geared up with PPE, and I stood with no mask, feeling totally vulnerable and in their hands. However, looking back on my experience in hospital, which originally was one of the most petrifying, turned out to be one of the most happiest, memorable and most amazing experiences I most likely will ever encounter.
Step and rock, step and rock. Ignore the world outside. Step and rock, step and rock. We're safe and warm inside. Dear you, that place was meant to be scary, but we made friends, you and I. We threw open the hospital curtains draped around our beds as barriers and reached out to the women around us, all feeling like us, all holding on to their bumps to stabilise themselves until they felt more sure on their feet. We formed a connection out of circumstance and bonded over the uniqueness and yet not so unique situation we had been thrown into. We laughed and we cried and we raged together. We shared our lives and our fears. We talked each other through labour pains and became each other's birthing partners. We found that sense of community so rarely found in modern society. We put aside our fears and held on to each other to get each other through, and in doing so, found a friendship unlike any other. We should have been hating every minute and constantly scared, but they made us happy. And little by little we got better. The medicine and the laughter combined to make us stronger, strong enough to meet each other.
When I met them, everything kind of changed. We went from being like a bit down about things not working and being on IVs and, you know, inductions not going so well, to having this solid sense of community, because we didn't have other halves there and that wasn't ideal, but it meant that we weren't shut behind a curtain and we actually talked and we actually found out a lot about each other, and the fact that even though this wasn't our ideal scenario, we were in this together because we had so much in common because of this mess.
I remember Liv arriving, seeing her walk in, and she turned around and I could see she was crying. And I said, I'd love to give you a cuddle, but I don't think I'm allowed to. And I think straight away you just realised that any barriers that you had were going to just totally fall in this scenario, because it was so odd, so unusual, and really so intimate.
Dear you, I will always remember that day. I will remember being the last to leave that room once filled with laughter. I will remember the relief of knowing it was safe to meet you. I will remember the music I listened to as the pain intensified. I will remember the relief of hearing we could go to the labour ward where your dad was waiting after a week of being apart. I will remember the fear of giving birth creeping up and battling it back with large breaths in time with carefully chosen music. I will remember squeezing hands given with love to let me know I wasn't alone anymore. I will remember losing any fear and allowing my body to do what hundreds of thousands of years of evolution had trained it to do. I will remember the release of endorphins as I caught you and held you in my arms. I will remember crying in disbelief that you were here and you were safe. I will remember kissing your head for the first time. I will remember lying exhausted with you on my chest, and I will hold that moment in my memory for eternity. We'd been through a lot, me and you, and you'd only just arrived.
It was an enjoyable experience, and I don't think it's one I'll ever forget. After the baby, the only negative really is the family impact and people not being able to see her. Betsy came home to an empty house with me, my husband and my little boy.
The one thing I can hand on heart say I'm really glad for out of all of this was the girls, because if the midwives couldn't do it or wouldn't do it, the girls would. You know, it was I'll watch your baby while you go for a wee, or I'll do this while you do that, you know, or come on, it's been a bad day, let's go for a walk in the rain.
Dear you, we broke out of hospital together. We entered as one and left as two. We took our first steps into the real world again, holding each other tight. We returned to our bubble with your siblings and became complete. Life isn't like how it was before. There was no flurry of visitors to welcome you home, but we had all we needed. You didn't get the welcome into the world that your sister and brothers did, but you will forever have all the love you will ever need. We slept when we needed to. We spent early mornings staring at each other and finding each other's rhythms. We made it out the other side together, safe. Back and fall, back and fall, back and fall. Hush, hush, hush. Back and fall, back and fall, back and fall. Hush, hush, hush. Step and rock, step and rock. Ignore the world outside. Step and rock, step and rock. We're safe and warm inside. Dear you, we've been through a lot, us two. This isn't how I planned it, and yet I gained much more than I lost. We formed an unbreakable bond, you and I. Our love overcomes all odds and outruns pandemics. We're never alone anymore. We have each other. We have our family. We have our new friends, our lighthouses in the storm. We've grown into our new lives, you and I like how we have grown. This isn't the world I envisioned for you. It isn't the world I knew. We're navigating this together, you and me, flying by the seat of our pants. Love, Mum.